You're listening to episode number 10 of Overprescribed. Welcome to Overprescribed, the show that raises America's awareness on pharmaceutical medications in this country, all in an effort to help you, the everyday consumer, to live the safest, healthiest, and most informed medication experience possible. Hi, everybody. It's Mika Pollack, your host, and I have to say that it feels so good to reach our number 10 episode. What a milestone. I'm happy that we're here, and I'm glad you're able to tune in today. For today's show, before we get into it, I just want to give you guys a little heads up that I'm not feeling so well. I think I'm coming down with something, but the show must go on. And I am ready to go. So today's show is actually inspired by a statistic that I've known about for some time. And it's kind of one of the many statistics that have encouraged or inspired the launch of the Overprescribed podcast. And it centers all around the rate of prescribing in this country, which really is the inspiration for the title of the podcast. And it really comes down to this. While the rate of U.S. population growth has been just under 1% year after year over the last decade or so, the rate of prescribing has grown at a much higher rate. As a matter of fact, between 2009 and 2016, which is an 8-year spread, the average growth on prescriptions dispensed in the U.S. was more than double on average, the rate of population growth. In 2009, the U.S. population was estimated at around 307 million people, while the number of prescriptions dispensed for that 307 million of us residing here at the time totaled at around 3.9 billion prescriptions. By the time America reached 2016, U.S. population had grown by 16 million, and at that point, over 4 billion prescriptions were dispensed. And that's no small number. That's actually a gigantic number if you think about it. If we think about the numbers for 2016, that will come to about anywhere from 13 to 14 medications per person taking a medication that given year. And I can tell you, I did not take that many in 2016, and no one in my household took that many. So there are clearly people in this country who are taking far more medications in a given year. And that population worries me because they're clearly a population on many, many different medications. And the result of that medication use may have questionable health benefit. And to compound the issue, it's not just the rate or how many prescriptions we're writing or dispensing in the U.S., it's also the cost of those prescriptions to the U.S. public. A late 2017 study by 3 researchers from the Commonwealth Fund, which is a private foundation based in New York, looked into how much the U.S. spends per capita on prescription drugs, and found that the U.S. spent more money on prescriptions than any other high-income country in the world, particularly as it relates to out-of-pocket cost for the U.S. population. Now, those specific countries in their study were, of course, the U.S., but also France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, Australia, the United Kingdom or UK, and Canada. And it was determined that the cost difference was not slight. It was assessed as significant. And I'll include a link to this particular study in the show notes. But of course, many of us know how expensive healthcare can be in the U.S. It's an ongoing narrative, an ongoing conversation. High cost or expensive healthcare costs in our country costs many to go without healthcare that may be deemed necessary due to lack of affordability. Or how about the stories of people who are faced with emptying out their savings accounts or even tapping into their retirement accounts just to afford their healthcare bills? We've all heard them. And maybe someone's listening to the show today and you're one of those people. High prescription drug prices have been a topic that I can remember for many, many years, dating back to when I was a little girl. Definitely a junior high student, a high schooler. And the topic remains a popular debate to this day. It has never gone away amongst people like healthcare policy analysts, healthcare advocates, politicians, and definitely U.S. consumers. While drug prices are high and are reasonably considered an issue, in my opinion, what's even more of an issue is what's happening to health outcomes given the current existence of our high prescribing society. So, for example, the CDC tracks key health outcomes as it relates to different chronic morbidities or diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and even cancer. But how much are we improving in those specific categories? Given all of the drug prescribing that's going on, it has steadily been increasing over the years. To answer that question really deserves its own podcast episode, but let's just say this. We're taking more pills as a society, and overall, we're not necessarily getting healthier as a whole and as a result. As a matter of fact, that same research study that highlighted the U.S. as one of the most costly countries to spend money on prescriptions pointed out a supportive finding. They concluded that although the American consumer population was consuming a higher mix of newer, more expensive medications, it was without any evidence to show a greater benefit to health outcomes as a result. So we're spending more money in one regard on prescriptions, but without the added benefit, without the logical added benefit of better health outcomes. Hearing all of this makes you wonder, well, why is this happening? How is this happening? How can we be taking more pills and still remain sick or become sicker as a society? Is it because we are overprescribing on risky drugs that don't come with a guarantee of health benefit for every person that takes that drug? Is it because we are taking more drugs that are not meant to cure an illness or a disease, but more so to just treat or even nowadays to prevent a disease or condition, leading people who fall into those categories, those who are taking drugs to treat or prevent an illness or condition, to take a particular drug or drugs for the rest of their life, or for a very long time or long term? Is it because we are taking more prescriptions of a certain type? Is it because we are prescribing more and more pills to our aging population as people continue to live longer and longer lives, increasing an already existing polypharmacy issue here in the U.S., particularly as it relates to an aging population or a geriatric population group? Which, by the way, is a very real issue as well and deserves its own podcast. Or maybe is it because if you go to see your doctor, there's a greater than 70% chance that you're going to walk out the door with a prescription? Is it easier to prescribe medications in America and easier to obtain those prescriptions? Is it more acceptable or just a part of the cultural fabric to take a medication, and medication use is as normalized as getting up in the morning and having a cup of coffee with your breakfast? Or how about the very real possibility that many people are taking medications without any added health benefit, or that they can't even tell whether there's a health benefit because they take so many, and who knows which one is helping and which one is not? Some have cited patients' increased access to medicines due to insurance or low-cost generics as the reasons for why we have a much higher prescribing rate. But I really don't think this touches the surface, not barely, as to why this is really happening. And the messenger of those reasons always needs to be taken into account due to bias. With total prescription drug expenditures growing by 30% when comparing what we spent in 2009, which was around $253 billion, versus what we spent in 2016, which was around $328 billion, a $75 billion jump. With a prescription dispensed growth rate of 13% and just a 5% U.S. population growth rate. So again, making that prescription dispense rate almost more than double of the U.S. population growth rate, there's no doubt that medications are a huge part of healthcare in America. And with drugs being approved faster, with no considerable groundbreaking change in how we are tracking and monitoring patient side effects and ensuring the right drugs are prescribed to the right patients 100% of the time, with direct-to-consumer drug commercials permeating just about every channel 24 hours a day, it makes you wonder, how far will it go? And will we ever see major health outcome changes that are beneficial and are correlated towards our higher prescription drug use? Okay, you're now listening to our In the News segment of the podcast, and let's talk about a few quick news stories that I've pulled from the internet. Some of these news stories are impacting folks on a national level, while others are more local or regional based. And I want to start with an article from the Washington Post. This article was published by and written by an author by the name of Carolyn Y. Johnson, and it was titled, "More than a third of American adults take prescription drugs linked to depression, study says." According to the article, drugs for blood pressure, heartburn, and even contraception were found to carry a risk of depression as reported by people who consumed those drugs in a research study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The article mentions how polypharmacy, which is the act of someone taking multiple medications, is playing a role in patient reports of depression and suicidal thoughts, and how polypharmacy, also called polydrugging, has dramatically increased between 1999 and 2012, especially for the elderly. In other news out of Colorado, a powerful acne medication by the name of Accutane made the news when it was linked to a murder of a young woman. The suspect himself, who was arrested, stated on a social media site that the medication had been problematic for him. Now, the news story did point out that the Accutane name was discontinued in the U.S., but it is available in multiple other names, generics, as well as I have noticed brand names. The drug manufacturer for Accutane, Roche Pharmaceuticals, released a statement stating, quote, "Based on many years of scientific research, no cause and effect between Accutane and psychiatric events or aggressive behaviors has been established," end quote. As an FYI, the news story is correct. Accutane was discontinued. It was discontinued back in 2009, but not without litigation controversy. It does go by the name isotretinoin, and according to the FDA on their website, it states, quote, "Isotretinoin is a potentially dangerous prescription medicine that should only be taken under the close supervision of your healthcare professional and pharmacist. If you are pregnant or may be pregnant, isotretinoin can cause birth defects, miscarriage, premature births, and death in babies," end quote. And lastly, the final news story I want to share with you is actually very much related to a heartbreaking topic that has been all over the news channels, particularly this week. And it is related to the separation of children from their families who were seeking asylum while trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border. The story comes out of the New York Daily News. It's written by Megan Cerullo. It could also be pronounced Cerullo, and I apologize if I'm butchering that name. And it's titled, quote, "Government-funded treatment center forcibly injected immigrant kids with drugs, legal filings," end quote. And what I'd like to do is to read this entire article to you, if you don't mind. Okay, the article reads as following. Migrant children traumatized from being detained under the Trump administration's zero-tolerance immigration policy are being forcibly injected with powerful psychotropic drugs that can lead to movement disorders, cause obesity, and have other long-lasting harmful effects on children, according to new legal filings. Children held at Shiloh Treatment Center, a government-funded facility in Manville, Texas, described being placed on multiple psychotropic medications without their parents' consent. One patient was prescribed a combination of 4 different drugs that conflicted with professional association guidelines and is known to increase the risk of type 2 diabetes, that they'll become suicidal and cause other cardiovascular problems, according to the legal filings. The child's mother was not consulted before the drugs were administered, even though she could have been reached. Carlos Holguin, Holguin, attorney for the Los Angeles-based Center for Human Rights and Constitutional Law, argues that the center would have required either parental permission or a court order before it could legally medicate the minor. They claim that they need psychiatric treatment and they need to be medicated, so it's basically a unilateral decision that they make, he told the Daily News. He called the practice of medicating children, most of whom come from Central America and have already suffered from traumatic events, dangerous. Either they've watched their parents get killed or have been raped, and then when they're in custody and placed in a shelter facility, they become more despondent and desperate to rejoin their families as time goes on, he said. Detention triggers psychological problems that the Federal Office of Refugee Resettlement and its contractors then treat them for, Holguin said. They do it before the law allows for the involuntary medication of children, which is allowed only if they are dangerous to others. He said the Office of Refugee Resettlement doles out medication to children who can't sleep. For example, one mother said her child was left unable to stand and had to use a wheelchair. Holguin said that all of the children with whom he met had been medicated. Forensic psychiatrist Mark Mills told the Center for Investigative Reporting's Reveal that authorities use medication to try to control the wound-up children or wound-up kids. You don't have to be a rocket scientist here. It looks like they're trying to control agitation and aggressive behavior with antipsychotic drugs, he said. He said the minor's conditions did not warrant the use of such strong medication. You don't need to administer these kinds of drugs unless someone is plucking out their eyeball or some such. The facility should not use these drugs to control behavior. That's not what antipsychotics should be used for. That's like the old Soviet Union used to do, he told Reveal. Wow, that's really sad. I'm actually going to link that article as well as all of our in the news articles in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening to the show.